Hello. Hi,
Hello.
all.
Hey,
How's it going?
everybody.
Happy early International Women's Day.
Yay.
Yeah, we wanted to do this on actual International Women's Day, but life happens and things came up, and so we're doing it a little day early. And yeah,
Yep.
how was your day today, Lisa?
Oh, it was very good. Thank you for asking. I got out for a walk. It was starting to feel like spring, a little bit starting to smell like spring. So there's
Nice.
hope. There's hope in the air. And I feel
Very
positive
nice.
about that. Yeah.
Good.
How was your day?
Good. I just worked, but I did a super womanly thing today for International Women's Day. I got a pap smear.
Yay.
And I unintentionally but hilariously wore my "The Future is Female" shirt to them. So yeah.
Good
So
for
yeah.
you.
So yeah, we can get started, I guess. We wanted to talk about some women's issues around the world, just a few um, little things we put together. So we'll start with what is International Women's Day? So it's a global holiday celebrated on March 8th to commemorate the cultural, political, and socioeconomic achievements of women. Hazel, tomorrow is International Women's Day, but we had to do this a day early. Uh, International Women's Day, it's for bringing attention to issues such as gender equality, reproductive rights, violence and abuse against women. And the first version of it was organized by the Socialist Party of America in New York in 1909.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So International Women's Day was officially pretty much created by this woman, Teresa Serba Malkiel. Malkiel. She was Ukrainian-born American. Um, she was the first woman to rise from being a factory worker to leadership roles in the Socialist Party. She established Women's Day in February 1909, and she, in her later career, did a lot of speaking tours around the United States and Europe. And her main focus was white supremacy in the Socialist Party, so combating it, the problem of white supremacy,
Hmm.
and also adult education for women workers.
Nice.
So, yay, Teresa. So, today we just wanted to present a couple issues that women face around the world. It is by no means like a conclusive research project. This is just a snapshot of a few issues with some tidbits of information. And if anyone feels inclined, they can certainly go research these issues more. We did put links in the description box to every article or source we used.
Yeah. And I want to say, like,
Oh,
we were
yes, please.
talking a little bit earlier that a lot of these are difficult issues that we're talking about. But I think
Mm-hmm.
what's so important, the first step in dealing with any of these things or moving forward with them is bringing awareness to it. So that's what we're trying to do in our small way here because
Mm-hmm.
you really can't care about an issue unless you know about it.
Yeah.
And the more you know about it, anytime any of these topics comes up in a feminist discussion or just some discussion you have, you'll know some more facts about them and you'll be equipped to talk about it, discuss it, hopefully educate other people. We're always
Mm-hmm.
talking about doing our online activism as like ripples in a pond.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah, it's raising
And
awareness.
I'll just add, I meant to put a slide in, but I forgot to. Trigger warning. We might be talking a little bit about violence against women,
Mhm.
sexual assault, so just know that going into this.
Mhm.
Okay, so I am going to start with an issue in Canada, missing and murdered Indigenous women. I am Canadian, so this is an issue that is close to my heart and something I deal with every day because I work in an industry that serves vulnerable people. Um, so we'll start a little bit of a history with the residential school system in Canada. It was created by our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald. The concept, in a nutshell, summed up by our Chief Justice McLaughlin, she said, "The objective," I quote from John A. Macdonald, our revered forefather, "was to take the Indian out of the child, and thus solve what he referred to as the Indian problem. Indianness was not to be tolerated, rather, it must be eliminated. In the buzzword of the day, assimilation. In the language of today, cultural genocide."
Wow.
Yeah, the Canadian residential school system. Between 1870 and 1910 is when it was kind of being developed. The objective of the Canadian government was to assimilate Aboriginal or Indigenous, those words are interchangeable, children into mainstream society. And by 1920, it was compulsory for children to attend these schools. People often think that Canadian residential schools was just boarding school, and it was not. Children were forcibly taken from their families, kidnapped by the RCMP,
Hmm.
and over 100,000 Canadian children, Indigenous children, went through this schooling system. They were kidnapped from their families, their tribes, their traditional and ancestral homelands, and forced into Catholic and Anglican education. Um, they suffered horrific abuses in these quote unquote schools, physical violence, sexual violence, and murder. And a
Wow.
lot of people in Canada talk about this as a thing of the past, and people need to move on. And it was a long time ago. Whoops, I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, and it wasn't. 1920 was 100 years ago, and the last Canadian residential school closed its doors in 1998.
Wow.
So, I'm 33, people that are my age attended these schools.
Mm.
It's not a thing of the past. um, So intergenerational trauma is a massive thing from these schools because, like I said, people my age went to these schools. Their parents did, and their grandparents did. Um, there was a lot of trauma. Obviously, people were beaten for speaking their own language, even though they didn't speak English. They weren't allowed to practice any of their culture. And the intergenerational trauma from all this, like, obviously, really impacts Indigenous communities today. A lot of people experience addictions, homelessness, and are vulnerable. And this, like coupled with racism, leads to a lot of nonchalance among white Canadians when it comes to the issues that Indigenous people are facing. And so the intergenerational trauma, the vulnerability, and the racism leads to a lot of crises.
Can I ask
Um,
you a question if you
yes,
know? Um, they were boarding schools like 7
yeah,
to 15, and then, like, what happened after that? They just
off you
put
go.
them. Yeah.
So,
Fend for yourselves.
yeah, so when these children were released, if they survived,
Mhm.
they no longer knew their own native language or culture at all. So
Yeah.
trying to integrate back into their tribal homes was hard or
Mhm.
impossible, but certainly white society wasn't going to accept them either.
Right.
So that just
Wow.
compounds the trauma. Um, so are you okay if I move on?
Yeah.
Okay. So in 2021 and 2022, mass graves and burial sites have been found on former residential school lands. The first one happened in June of 2021, where 750 children were found in a mass unmarked grave.
Oh my god.
Since then, another 10 schools have discovered mass graves, totaling 2,156 children. And another 18 former schools are uh, now in the process of doing searches on their own properties, and many, many more bodies are to be found, I'm sure. So, yeah, Canada is considered this utopia sometimes, but we have a really dark history. I'm
Indeed.
going to answer this question from Fander. What made these owners of these schools think it was okay to do this? The Catholic Church. They were entirely run and operated by Catholic and Anglican churches, priests, and nuns. Um, I live in an area of Canada where there are two incredibly huge populations of Indigenous people, and there's 4 or 5 even former residential schools right near me. Um, and all of the stories that a lot of Indigenous people share is just horrific, and it was, yeah, violence and abuse from nuns and priests, people of God. Emma says United Churches ran some too. That's correct, yes. Yeah, so that leads us to missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's a massive crisis in Canada. A study between 1980 and 2012 found that 1,017 women and girls who were Indigenous were murdered. That homicide rate is 4.5 times higher than all other women in Canada. So that's not just white women in Canada, that's white women, Asian women, Pacific Islander women, Black women, all women.
Wow.
It's horrific. 67% are murder cases, 20% missing, and 4% suspicious death. 9% the case is unknown what happened. Indigenous women and girls in Canada represent approximately 10% of all female homicides. However, they make up only 3% of the female population.
Wow.
So it's a massive crisis. I mean, it's not like hyperbole to say if you talk to an Indigenous person in Canada, they know a missing or murdered Indigenous woman in their family. I mean, it's rampant, and these women don't get the attention that they should. Their cases remain highly unsolved, and
Who
families.
who
Yep.
are committing these crimes?
So I did not include a slide of those stats, but in the
Mhm.
fact sheet in the description box below, I believe it says that I don't know percentages or numbers, but the majority are someone known to the woman.
Mhm.
Then the next step down is what they would consider to be an acquaintance, someone the woman has met. And then a small percentage are random violence.
Wow.
Wild Moonchild said, "Isn't the road that crosses Canada to Alaska notorious for women going missing on it?" Yes. This is the highway in northern British Columbia called the Highway of Tears. Something, I think it's 18 to 22 Indigenous women have gone missing on this highway.
What
Um,
makes them more vulnerable than other groups of women?
I think intergenerational trauma,
Mhm.
without prejudice here, leading to some potentially high risk lifestyles. Um, and so in the case like where the majority of missing and murdered Indigenous women suffered at the hands of someone they know, the perpetrators are
Mhm.
also survivors and dealing with intergenerational trauma. So it's
Mm.
a community of traumatized and people left to their own to sort it out for themselves.
And they're experiencing more poverty, I'm assuming.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes,
So
yes.
poverty usually correlates with
Exactly.
crime statistics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In this particular case with the Highway of Tears, it's this highway that stretches in the remote northern areas of British Columbia. It's a logging and trucking
Mhm.
highway pretty much. But there's no infrastructure, there's no transportation, there's no way for people to get from point A to point B at all. So hitchhiking is
Oh,
common,
that's scary.
and a lot of people unfortunately do not come home.
Wow.
Um, yes, Canada does have the same issues with federal versus Indigenous Reserve Police. Yes. Yeah, so it's awful. Uh, so, what's being done? Not a lot, which is horrible, but not a lot. However, there has been massive grassroots movement called Sisters in Spirit. Every October 4th, communities across Canada hold the Sisters in Spirit vigil. Um, I've only been to the one in my own community, so I can't speak for them all, but it usually consists of a march from usually City Hall to a community gathering place where people speak, they play songs, traditional drumming and dancing. And it's a place to honor the lives of missing and murdered Indigenous women, show support for families who are still looking for answers, and try to promote some healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's see here. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of reconciliation to be done. Canada does have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee that is working to address the atrocities, and the federal government has issued a formal apology for what was done to Indigenous people. But I mean, so what?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't fix the issue. That doesn't bring clean drinking water to reserves. That doesn't fix poverty. That doesn't fix the trauma. There is currently the Indian School Survivors Network, I think it's called, that is working with survivors of these schools to get some justice. Usually it's in the form of monetary payouts.
Mm.
But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done because people do have that attitude, like I said, of it was a long time ago, it's time to move on, pull up your bootstraps.
Yeah. I mean, that's really familiar in
Yeah,
America as well. And
yeah.
I think something we've talked about too, with respect also to women in general, is when there's a system in place that's, there's systematic oppression.
Mm-hmm.
But then when people are going through their individual difficulties, they're sort of blamed for it individually. And like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, the pull up your bootstraps, time to move on, time to get over it. You know, it's not just the trauma, it's the economic disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so much, there's systemically disadvantaged people.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah. And like also Indigenous people in the past, I think even up till the 1960s or maybe even the 70s, were required to have permits to even leave the reservations.
Wow.
So of course that contributed to some major systemic inequality because they didn't have the same access to like education and work and services.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's just a mess of awfulness, and nobody really knows about this crisis, or it's not talked
Mm-hmm.
about. If you're not from here, that's for sure.
Yeah. It feels like it's like an easy thing to overlook. It's like, oh, that's just affecting that tiny group of people, you know.
I'm putting in the chat a podcast recommendation for all of this stuff. It's called Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay is a town in Ontario that they deal with a lot of racism there, and the podcast is just an exploration into where that came from and how people are dealing with it. So it's a good rec. Not currently in the description. I forgot to add them, but I'm once this is done, I will go back and link two documentaries that I think are incredibly valuable uh, to learn more about this. And that's my first topic.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I didn't really know about any of that, so I appreciated learning about it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I am going to be talking about Pakistan. Pakistan. Why aren't girls being educated? There is a huge gap in education, participation, and literacy. The literacy rate in Pakistan is one of the lowest in the world. I think for adult men, it's about 60% are literate, and for adult women, it's like 40%. So, um, more than half of women grow up to adulthood and can't even read or do any of the basics. So,
Mm.
question is why, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So just a little brief geography lesson for those who need it. Pakistan is located between India, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, sort of like not one and not the other. Up until 1947, Pakistan was part of India, and at the end of the British rule in India, it split, and Pakistan is mostly Muslim, India is mostly Hindu. So there you see it on the map. They have a population of 220 million, which for the size of the country is
Wow.
quite a lot. Yeah. 30% of the population lives in poverty. Compare that to the US, which is about 10 or 11%. And poverty in Pakistan means something different than poverty here as well. There are many places where they have no sanitation at all. People go to the bathroom in the street and that kind of thing. So we're talking about really extreme poverty, food instability, and things like that. They have quite a decentralized government. There's different tribal governments in different regions. They don't have a strong central government like we're used to in Western countries. There's a lot of political instability and corruption, and those things are all going to factor into this picture. So lack of education disproportionately affects girls. Both boys and girls are negatively impacted by lack of education, but there is quite a significant gap. So you do have 22 million children are not in school.
Wow.
Yeah, primary school aged kids, though, that's up to grade 5. 79% of boys are in school, but only 68% of girls. Then by grade 6, you have 51% of boys and 41% of girls. And by grade 9, only 13% of girls are still in school. And of course, graduating high school and going on to college, it's virtually none.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think putting this together made me really feel so grateful for like the opportunities, I've had.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. Because you just, it's something that you can take for granted, and then you realize it's not guaranteed for everybody in the world. So, and the disproportionality does vary by region. In fact, there are some rural tribal areas such as Balochistan where only 25% of girls have ever attended school and only 19% complete 5th grade. So 4 out of 5 don't even get to 5th grade.
Oh my God. And
Yeah.
that's 10 years old, 11 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah. They're out of school by then.
Hmm.
And we're going to hear why. So I think there are 3 main drivers, and there is some overlap in all of these things. But you have extreme poverty, you have a government that doesn't really care, and then you also have cultural norms and cultural issues that create this problem. So the first issue here is poverty. Even at so-called public schools, students are often expected to pay tuition, registration, and exam fees to move up grades. And families just don't have any extra money. The average salary in Pakistan is 150 US dollars per month. And of course, the cost of living is less, but even so, it's like that's not going very far, right? So kids are also expected to provide their own stationery, paper and pens, uniforms, school bags, shoes, things like that. And a lot of families they just don't have the money for that. and that's enough to keep a girl out of school, is that she doesn't have shoes to wear. Because the wages are so low there that even small costs are really hard for poor families to bear. And then on top of that, not only can they not afford school, but they need those kids to go and work because they need the income. So a lot of
Right.
girls do work in factories, assembling consumer goods, sewing, beading, things like that. Girls are suited to that type of detailed work. And so they're sent to do that, or they're needed to do housework at their own home, or they're, rented out to go clean somebody else's house. So poverty is a major, major contributor. On top of that, you have a government that, like I mentioned, is very decentralized. What that means is that they don't have like a federal Department of Education the way that we have in the US. They don't have any national standards for curricula, for teaching qualifications. Everything's done on kind of a regional basis, so it varies so widely if you're in one part of the country versus others. They're all pretty bad. The government has been prioritizing military spending over education for a long time. Not super shocking, but
Right.
they spend 2.5% of their GDP on education and over 4% on military spending, which is actually not that different of a ratio than the US, but because Pakistan is such a poor country, it kind of makes a difference, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not spending even sort of like a basic level, and they have one of the lowest spending amounts per student in the world. When students drop out of school, there is no accountability. Nobody comes to their house to follow up and like see what happened, right? The way that we would expect in the West. So even though technically the government says, oh, students need to be educated through age 16, if they stay home, no one is coming to check up on them. There's also a lot of corruption. So school administration and teaching jobs are given out to friends through nepotism. And, they collect a salary for their teaching position, and then they won't show up. And that's a huge problem. Parents complain the teacher hasn't shown up in weeks or whatever. So yeah, there's like tons of corruption. And then finally, boys' education is really prioritized because most schools at any grade level are single sex, because of their culture, right? Muslim
Right.
culture, the boys and the girls are separated, especially as you get to higher levels of like high schools and stuff. And
Right.
if the community only has the resources to build one school, they're going to build a boys' school. So again, a lot of these issues are overlapping, but
Yeah.
the backdrop in general, the background noise that women and girls live with in Pakistan is very violent. Violence against women and girls is a serious and prevalent problem. Rape and domestic violence are totally prevalent. There are over 1,000 honor killings every year in
My God.
Pakistan. There are acid attacks, and the government doesn't care. They don't take any of this stuff seriously. They don't pursue it. They don't follow up and say, like, we need to protect women. They just don't care. And then on top of women's violence, specifically against women and girls, there's also just a general violent culture there. There's a lot of insurgency. There's Taliban
Yeah.
operating in pockets. There's religious and ethnic conflict. So, you know, And you could see in this picture that I put in there, like, it's really dangerous for girls even to walk to and from school. And that's a huge reason that they stay out of school, is because
Right.
they're afraid of being harassed, assaulted, kidnapped even. Those are real fears. And if they are harassed or assaulted or sexually assaulted, they will be blamed for it. And they
Mm-hmm.
could be killed by their own parents or brother. So, especially as they get older into adolescence, that's a major issue. There's also been a lot of targeted attacks and bombings of schools. We think in the U.S. We have so many school shootings there. They've had over 200 bombings of schools
Jeez.
in the 2000s, and 1/3 of those were specifically targeted at girls' schools. In 2014, there was a major attack on a school in Peshawar province where Taliban militants killed 145 students. So crazy violence they deal with, you know. And of
Horrible.
course, that's going to make anybody afraid to go to school, right? Then on top of that, you have child marriage. Um, 21% of girls are married before 18,
One
and
in five.
1 in 5, and 3% are married before 15. And a huge reason for that is that parents are so afraid that their daughter is going to get involved with a boy and hold his hand or whatever, that they're like, I'm going to get you married off before that can happen. So once they hit puberty, the parents are looking around for, someone for their daughter to marry.
Wow.
There are two types of schools in Pakistan: public school and private school. So, public school, as I mentioned, they're not very well funded. Teachers don't always have qualifications, they don't show up. Because there are so few schools, both in urban and rural areas, you get overcrowding, you get long travel times. They're walking on foot to go to school. And if there's not a school within a certain distance, right, they're just not going to be able to go at all. And then also in public schools, they do use corporal punishment. In other words, hitting the
Jeez.
kids as a form of punishment. Yeah,
Awful.
I know. And then there's also private school. Private school is a really exploding market there. Um, because of the lack of quality public schools. So a lot of them are run by NGOs, international sort of charity organizations. And those are some of the only schools that are available in some areas. There isn't a public school, so they set up a private school. The issue is the quality can vary quite a lot. There's no standard curricula. Teachers are often really underpaid. Some are international teachers. They're not necessarily trained really well. And the quality of the education is not going to be super ideal. Enrollment can be confusing for the parents. And then many, many private schools only teach Quran. So that's it. There's no science, math,
Oh,
literature, language. They're just teaching
studying the
Quran.
Quran.
So even though these kids are technically in school, all they're learning
Right.
is the Quran. So yeah, quite. What's the solution? Well, I mean, the major issue is that they're not seeing women and girls as people, the thing that we always talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, they see them, I think, kind of like on the level of an animal or something like that, or a property. So
Yep.
until men in Pakistan start to view women as human beings, this is not going to be solved. How they get there, I don't know. I think one possible motivation they could have would be an economic incentive, because women becoming educated is a major driver for improved economic circumstances in a country.
Right.
So, for such a poor country, they should be looking at every solution possible to improve their economic circumstances and educating women and making sure women are literate. Like, that would be a huge, huge boost economically. It's just that culturally they're still so stuck in the dark ages. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, and an
again, like,
educated woman is dangerous.
yeah, a lot of them feel that way. Certainly, their Taliban exists there, and they're responsible for a lot of, attacks of women who want to get an education.
Yeah.
But I really think that probably a lot of people there, men, maybe some women, don't feel that there's really a problem to be solved. I mean, certainly a lot of people know there is, but a lot of people aren't even questioning the status quo. So if you don't see something as a problem, it's going to be very hard to be
Mm-hmm.
motivated to fix it, because you don't there's nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the situation in Pakistan. Now you know a little bit more about it. And like Lesbianist Art says, educated women mean breaking the cycle. Yeah. And, education is correlated with not only better like economic fortunes, but less violence against women as
Mm-hmm.
well. So, yeah, I mean, violence and lack of education are really tools used to control women, keep them subordinate. And, that may be what the majority of men there want.
Yeah.
So that's it. Not very happy topic, but
That's okay.
yeah,
Thank you for that and for sharing that with us. I
you're welcome.
appreciate that. Okay, I am going to talk about Venezuela, a crisis of reproductive rights and services. Um, I don't speak Spanish. I have a translation of what this says, though. Um, so the sign, or it says, "Our right to decide, safe abortion."
Mhm.
Okay, so Venezuela and reproductive sovereignty. Abortion is illegal in Venezuela except for incredibly rare and specific circumstances. And even then, it's rarely possible or permissible. To save a woman's life is not even always the reason that it would be permissible. Um,
Mm.
Having an abortion can land you a 6 month to 2 year prison sentence. And
Wow.
Venezuela has one of the highest rates for inducing your own abortion in the world. For every 1,000 births, there are about 300 abortions, which most would consider quote unquote back alley abortions.
Oh my gosh.
That's a huge, huge, huge amount. Um, this picture is a young lady called Jessica. She's 21 and she did have a painful and lonely abortion. Behind her, the red sign says, "Mother by choice, not by punishment." Contraceptives in Venezuela are impossible to access. 90% of Venezuelans do not have access to any kind of contraception at all. Um, Venezuela is an incredibly poor country as well, like Pakistan.
Mhm.
Um, a pack of just 3 condoms runs around $4.40 US. That is 3 times a monthly minimum wage.
Wow.
So a monthly wage is around $1.15.
Wow.
Um,
I'm going to sound ignorant, but Venezuela is a communist country, isn't it?
uh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know.
Google that.
I'm so sorry. Um, yeah, so birth control pills cost even more, $11 a month. So that's ranging around 100 times more than a monthly wage. And an IUD, $40 a month. That's more than 25 times minimum wage in a month. Um,
Wow.
so couples will often like ration their contraceptives, or they'll abstain for sex, or they'll plan around menstrual cycles. But I mean, none of that is perfect. Accidents happen, and not all women have choices when it comes to sex. So
Of course.
many children is the norm. Uh, it's not uncommon for Venezuelan women to have 5 to 7 children,
Wow.
because they cannot prevent pregnancy, they cannot end pregnancies, and many don't have a choice to engage in sex or not.
Mhm.
Um, so, with no contraceptives of any kind available, sterilization surgeries are the go to, as young as 14 years old.
Mhm.
The chief of OBGYN in Guarico State estimates performing 4 to 500 surgeries across 4 months in 2017.
Wow.
Dr. Reza Martinez, a gynecologist, reported that she sees about 15 patients a day, and each day, about 5 out of 15 request sterilization surgery.
Yeah, I will mention that that's the most popular form of birth control in the United
Yeah.
States as well, which
Mm,
is shocking
mm,
to me because
mm-hmm.
it's like, what is a pretty significant irreversible surgery is like chosen over condoms?
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. So, yeah, as young as 14, teenage girls are having this surgery done because they see the lives of women around them and the multiple children they have by age 20. Um, so, it's better to be sterilized at 14 and know that you will never have children, but that's what you have to do to protect yourself.
Mm.
Um, Getting abortion pills in the black market is possible, but incredibly difficult.
Mhm.
And nobody really necessarily knows what the pills even really are. And so, if you suffer complications from taking an abortion pill, you don't reach out for any help because you'll go to jail. So,
Wow.
it's horrible. Um, there are some nonprofits in Venezuela doing their best to help. These nonprofits are incredibly critical resources. They offer low cost or free contraception. The most common are like birth control implants, um,
Mhm.
because those are the most long lasting. And whereas when
Mm.
it comes to pills or condoms, like you need a continuous supply of those things.
Mhm.
And so PLAFM is, I don't remember what it stands for, and it's in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, I'm sorry. But PLAFM is a nonprofit organization across Venezuela. Um, they have 5 clinics, and their waiting rooms are always packed. Women often will sleep outside on the street, knowing that
Wow.
it's going to be birth control implant day, and so they want to be sure that they get a spot. So the night, or nights plural, leading up to birth control day, women will line up and sleep on the streets to ensure
Mhm.
that they get one. Um,
And
yeah,
it's like
it's
those, I mean, those long, I think it's called LARC, long-acting reversible contraception.
mhm,
Like, they have a lot of side effects and physical effects too, you know? Yeah, that's
mm,
amazing. But, I mean, as children are also a side effect, you know?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, This is a good question here from Roxy. I wonder about the STD statistics in Venezuela. I don't have that information. I'm sorry. The sources I looked at didn't really discuss that. Um, so I'm sorry about that. But
I think my understanding about Venezuela, I mean, there's not a lot of exchange of information between Venezuela and the US at least, or I don't know, other who their trading partners are and stuff, but
yeah,
I
there
think
are
of it as a
sanctions on Venezuela from the
yeah,
US.
there's I think of it as an extremely isolated country, like
Mm-hmm.
almost like a North Korea type, but I don't know within South America or elsewhere, like, you know, I mean, there are those countries in the world. Cuba is kind of another one too
Mm-hmm.
that are just really, from a US perspective, they seem
Yeah.
very super isolated. And if you are unlucky enough to be born there, you're somewhat trapped in a pretty desperate situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredibly desperate. I mean, women in Venezuela are so desperate to end pregnancies that,
Hmm.
like we said, they go for back alley abortions and die because they
Yeah,
can't seek any help.
I feel like it's things like this that, because it's becoming more and more of an issue in the US as well. Access to abortion is
Mm-hmm.
really becoming very limited here. And you have to look at a country like this. Is this what we want our role model to be on this issue? Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So it sounds like there may be like a Planned Parenthood type of organization.
Yeah, that's what Platform is. They're also Platform gets a lot of funding from the International Planned Parenthood Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, a donation to the IPPF is always a good call.
Mm-hmm.
And they serve obviously countries, not just Venezuela, tons of countries around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what can be done um, at this point from an international perspective? I think donations of funds to the IPPF. Uh, that's what they need. They need money to
Mm-hmm.
provide these birth control implants to women who need them.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that in light of all this Russia stuff, that there's been some chitter chatter with Venezuela because they're an oil producing country,
Yes, big time.
So they're kind of, this is just, I haven't read deeply into it, but that they're warming up a little bit to the idea of like, oh hey, some of these Western countries are now going to need oil.
Yeah.
Maybe we can, westernize to an extent that now people will trade with us or whatever.
Mm,
But I mean, one reason why we don't trade with certain countries is human rights abuses.
yeah.
Of course, some of our biggest trading partners have major human rights abuses too. So I guess you pick and choose which ones or
Right.
whatever. But yeah, yeah, that was super interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. The New York Times article in the description box about this is amazing because it gives a lot of in depth stories about women's stories too.
Hmm.
Also, in the description box, there's an interactive map where you can find out the status of abortion in any country in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so our little wrap up here. Like we said, these are just snapshots of some of the issues women and girls are facing around the world. This is not like a super thoroughly researched project.
Hmm.
We just wanted to give a little snapshot. Um, and to the chat, like, are there any other issues in around the world that you feel passionate about, or anything anyone wants to say or share? Because this is our last slide.
Yeah. When I was looking up issues to find one that I thought would be interesting to develop, I did look into like menstrual huts a little bit.
Mm,
But from what I could see, it's like mostly a thing of the past, that it's not
okay.
a super prevalent as much as it used to be.
Mm,
Um, So I thought that was like somewhat hopeful. I mean, things do tend to progress in the right direction. Like even when you were talking about the um, issues with Indigenous women in Canada, it's
Yeah.
like people are so much more like those schools that would never. I know you're saying like it's in the recent past, and that's like why
Hmm.
it's so important to not overlook how the impact that it's having. But that would never be done today. It's like people have learned, you know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so at least we can say that in certain things have moved in a more progressive direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, knock on wood. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Here.
Black Roses question: can it be true solidarity between women of all races and social class if they are divided by race and class? Well, I think that being female is like as a common denominator, if women can recognize that, that ultimately is your most significant source of oppression, and it's
Hmm.
universal to all women. And yes,
That's what
women,
unites us.
yeah, they
Our
experience,
femaleness.
intersectionality is the idea that we experience it to different degrees.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah,
I think it's possible and achievable.
I agree.
Fender says, I'm bothered by news of domestic abusers getting released out on bond and then murdering their partners. What are your thoughts on this? Yeah, I'm bothered by it too. um, they say a woman's most vulnerable time is when she's about to leave a domestic abuser.
Mm,
That is the quote unquote prime time for when she will be killed by him.
mm-hmm,
And getting released out on bond and then murdering their partners, that is, one of the massive failings of our supposed justice system.
mm.
Um, the opportunity for bonding out. Uh,
Yeah,
when
there's
you,
been a lot of bail reform in New York. My best friend is a cop in New York, and it's been a nightmare there. And I think I don't have any stats to back this up, but I would guess that women, are some of the worst hit by that. Yeah, I mean, it's so dangerous, like
yeah,
you're saying. Um,
and
so many abused women like won't even go to the cops
right,
ever, and then like if they do, and then that's not the final thing, like they're in
yeah,
big trouble.
yeah, and going to the cops is obviously like a huge catalyst for punishment by their abuser.
Yeah,
So there's not
exactly.
there's so many levels to this. It's not only our justice system, it's not only the bond system, it's not only the dismissal of women when they do speak up, it's a lack of resources and supports for women to truly leave these situations and like,
Mhm.
yeah, find protection for themselves and their children.
And then at that
I
point, they're so brainwashed and everything.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
I agree, Fender, there should be no bond for abusers. But
Mhm.
on the like, additionally though, our justice system doesn't take abuse seriously anyway. So even if there is no bond permitted, there's
Mhm.
more than likely going to be no jail time either.
Yeah,
Um,
once they get, like, through the court system or whatever, like yeah.
yeah, it's like community service, and here's a restraining order. Okay,
Yeah.
and so what? Like, there's just no justice for women who survive abuse.
Mhm. Yeah, there's one way to prevent it, though.
Not partnering with men. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a separatist, you're a separatist. We speak about that often.
Mhm.
Um, and we've talked privately, and I think even you've talked on your channel that um, the promotion of prevention is not like a bad thing.
Right. And it's also not victim blaming either
No, of course
at
not.
all. Saying that, like,
This is what you
it's
can do
actually
to.
empowering. It's
I think
like, oh,
so.
here's a practical thing you can do to ensure that you're not going to experience partner violence. Don't have a partner. It's not a guarantee against all male violence if you
Of course.
come from a family of men. Of course, there's also random violence, but that is so rare. You wouldn't,
So rare.
yes, not how it's portrayed in the media or whatever, or we're taught we're taught that we're much more likely to be assaulted on the street by a stranger,
Yeah.
and the
It's
most
just not
dangerous
true.
person is the man sharing your bed.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why that's like propaganda that's fed to us, but
Wild Moonchild is bothered that no other arrests have been made from the whole Epstein trafficking. Yeah, I think
yeah.
Epstein was the sacrificial lamb to die for all of their sins,
Hmm.
and probably nothing else really is going to happen.
Well, Ghislaine
Well, and Ghislaine,
Maxwell,
but
a woman. I
yeah,
mean, not I'm not saying she should be absolved of her sins because she's a woman, but it's notable that it's a woman who took the fall for what no
for all
doubt
of the
a
men.
lot of men who were involved in it.
Ooh,
Yeah.
did you see? I saw a headline today on like the Twitter trending topics that was
Okay.
like,
You know me and
um,
Twitter.
I know you're not on Twitter. I'm on Twitter only for nice times, for
Okay,
fun
good.
things. But anyway, the trending topic header was like, um, friendship with Epstein contributed to divorce, says Melinda Gates, Bill Gates' ex-wife.
Whoa, what?
Yeah.
Wow. What?
Eh.
I gotta look that up.
Yeah, good times, hey? I
Bill
mean,
Gates is shady? Question mark.
everyone was friends with Jeffrey Epstein, so oh boy.
Yeah.
I did not see this. I can imagine it was horrible.
Oh,
"Quote unquote sex
he's a
work."
real liberal guy.
Just a little, just a
Like
little.
yeah, I used to like him, but I mean, it just this liberal crap is I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, yeah, some of his segments have been incredible, but separatism is the way to go. Hello, Hannah. Yes, exactly.
Hey, Hannah.
Exactly. I'm trying to think if I thought of anything else or I saw anything else today that I wanted to talk about. Um, One thing, Lisa, you and I talked about just yesterday or maybe this morning, I don't remember.
Hmm.
But the trend of an uptick of searches for
Oh
pornography.
yeah, I think
Um,
someone commented that on my
okay,
channel. Um, yes, the people, men, not people, not they're not people, right? Men are searching for Ukrainian women pornography or refugees or what were you saying, like war rape
like,
and
yeah,
stuff?
the search
Sorry
term
to getting
war
you
rape.
demonetized.
Uh,
Not that this whole
no,
topic, whatever. Yeah, I mean, this is the depravity
of
that we
men.
don't even want to think about exists, but is surrounding us all like a poisonous cloud. It's constant and everywhere.
Yeah, sick.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a
This little
great.
conversation happening between Rad Granger and let's be honest, Art here. Rad says, as long as separatism is not an option for every woman on earth, none of us are truly free. But those who are able should absolutely practice it. I agree. Practice it to some degree. Challenge yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Part of separatism is choosing women, women's business, women workers, cashiers, doctors, etc. Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily have to mean commune in the woods where you grow vegetables and dance around a fire. Um,
Right. Yeah, I think there's, there's different levels of it. To me, it's like not partnering with men in a romantic
yeah.
sense. Because I have a couple of men in my life, but like I even limit that. But yeah, I mean, I always think of like if I'm going to tell somebody what if someone's like, "What is separatism?" Having our own bathrooms is a form of separatism.
Hmm. Yes.
It
I
just
mean,
means having boundaries and saying no and having lines and that you feel comfortable with and instituting that, it's not like a militant thing, but we've been shamed for it by other women, which is disgusting.
yeah.
And it's not, no one should ever feel shame. The idea that any woman is making other women feel ashamed to say not want to have a relationship with men or something is
Or to
totally
practice
absurd.
her separatism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one should be like that's like virgin shaming and stuff. Honestly, it's like the same thing,
Hmm.
which is like so embarrassing.
Yeah.
Yes. I retired from men. Yes. I love
The
that.
your comment just there about bathrooms reminded me,
Yeah.
like, or in, I don't know, um, having a lack of female bathrooms was a way of forced separatism. It kept women in the home and out of
Yes.
public life because there was no facilities for them to relieve themselves.
Mhm.
And women fought for the right to have restroom facilities in public, and maintaining those spaces is incredibly important. And like, I know people talk about the bathroom stuff when it comes to trans issues so much, but it
Mhm.
is incredibly important because with men now being permitted into women's bathrooms, again, that's driving women away. Women may not want
Absolutely.
to go somewhere where there's only gender neutral bathrooms available.
I have a
And
video about that
oh,
exact
do you?
topic.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone go look for it on Lisa's channel.
Um, but yeah, absolutely. It's so critical, like, we protect all of those spaces for sure.
Hmm. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a ton of anything else to say. Strengthening
Yeah.
female-only facilities mobilizes women. Sorry, I cut you
Yeah.
off there, Lisa.
No, it's okay. No, I was gonna say I'm game for a few more minutes if people have any other things they want to bring up. We have 20 people here, so feel free to at
Yeah.
least say hi and check in. Um, but yeah, I'm really appreciative of the beautiful slides that you put together and all the research and everything. I thought was really great
Yeah.
and um, definitely motivated me to do the research on Pakistan, which it's something like I knew about in general terms, but then really looking at why all these things are the way they are. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
important to like see things from in like a historical way so
Yeah.
that we don't repeat them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Honestly, there's like so many more topics I could have gone on. Like,
Mhm.
we're already not an hour. We would be here for hours and hours. But I think of like, um,
Yeah, I had
I
a
watched a,
list. Let me see.
I know, I
Like,
watched a great documentary once about women in India
mhm.
being empowered to create their own menstrual products so
Oh,
that they
wow.
can engage in public life.
Hmm.
That was a great one. I saw another documentary about women in the Middle East learning how to make circuit breakers to bring electricity to their village. That was really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I remember about 10 or 15 years ago, there was like a huge wave of like microloans and like
Mm-hmm.
because
Oh yeah.
if you could lift up a woman, and it's like sometimes they just, because these countries have such their GDP per capita or whatever so low relative to the US, like they can start a whole business with like $50,
Right.
and get a business up off the ground, or make major improvements to a farm or something like that, where they can start to generate their own income. And it's like, yeah, I don't know what happened. I remember there was like a movement of,
Hmm.
somewhat like crowdsourcing investments in small businesses in like developing countries. Another, like some of the issues that I wrote down, well, abortion rights you talked about,
Yeah.
um, female genital mutilation,
Hmm.
that's like
That still exists.
a very major issue. Yeah. And just like what it is, and where it's happening and why it's happening. And it's often women who are perpetrating it too.
Yeah, and it exists in the West too. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
um,
absolutely.
if you think it's not happening in Canada and the United States and the UK, and it absolutely is.
Yeah. Um, another, just of the few topics I wrote down, I think in Russia, Russia's a super hot topic right now, so I didn't want to
Ooh.
touch that. But
Hmm.
their domestic violence laws,
Yes.
as far as I know, that they've like rolled them back quite a lot, and domestic violence like pretty much isn't prosecuted now at all.
No, domestic
So
violence is decriminalized in
yeah,
Russia, so it's
that's,
fully okay to beat your female partner or children.
I mean, fast track to just becoming like a total third world country. But like, you know, in a sense, that's like one of the, like, that's kind of a theme of this whole talk, was like that uplifting women is a way to bring societies into the first world. And, you know, it lifts up everyone. That's the thing with feminism. Like, it's for women, it's for the liberation of women, but men also benefit.
Of course.
Like, everyone benefits when women are lifted up. It's like a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yep.
Then another thing, let's see, what else did I write down? Oh yeah, human trafficking. There are like over 1 million slaves in the U and sorry, enslaved people in the US, like right this moment.
Um, it's so wild that you say that because I I don't know if anyone knows the podcast Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, but he produces like 2 episodes a year, and today's it's 5 hours long,
Oh
but
my
it is
god.
on the history of the Atlantic slave trade.
Wow.
And I listened to the whole thing today
Oh my gosh.
at work. It was incredible. But the one of the stats that he said in that was that there are more enslaved people today than there were during the Atlantic slave trade. Around 40 million people are enslaved in the world today.
Wow, yeah. It's a major issue. And then I think, oh yeah, we were talking about this with this refugee crisis, because now there's like, the last I heard was 1.7 million refugees, which is, it's like so hard to even wrap your mind around that. But people
Mhm.
are, there's such a huge volume. They're showing up at train stations in Poland and Germany,
Yeah,
and people are just have signs there that say we have one bedroom for and not only that, but a lot of it's women, right? Because the men had to stay behind. That
yeah,
was the required. If you're 18 to 60, you couldn't leave the country. So it's women with their children going to stay with strangers. Sometimes they're just meeting them for the first time at like a train station or a bus station or
hmm,
whatever. It's,
the
I mean, that was
opportunity
the
for
first thing that my mind went to, is this is the opportunity for human trafficking, like big time. And there, we know men will jump on any, right?
opportunity.
Yes. They'll
And
jump
these
on it.
women and children are obviously incredibly vulnerable, being displaced
Right.
and at the mercy of people who will quote unquote help.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's scary.
And Void and Cold, did you see the Russian streamer that made it? Yes, I did see that story. That was awful. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
Oh, yeah. It was for like 3 or 4 years ago, I think.
Holy
Yeah, he was live streaming. He put his girlfriend like out on the balcony or something, and she died of exposure.
Oh my God.
Yeah, on the stream. It's
Oh,
like the most degenerate, like, yeah.
wow. That is sick.
Hannah says the movie Salt of the Earth. I love movie recommendations, by the way, guys.
Has that
Always
same
looking.
theme. Uplifting women uplifts everyone. It's a good movie. It's based off the Mexican American workers' strike in New Mexico in the early 1950s. I
Nice.
love a solidarity
Yeah.
movement. That's amazing.
Well, shall we wrap up?
I think so. Yeah, this was really fun. I'm so glad that people came and listened and learned and put their stuff in the chat for us to talk about because, yeah, this was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you guys for eating your vegetables. Remember, it's
Your
part of
brain
a
vegetables.
balanced diet. Don't eat too much cotton candy. Make sure you're getting your vegetables and your amino acids.
Yeah.
No, it's really important to learn about this stuff because it does come up from time to time, and it's really important to be able to like talk about it in an intelligent way and understand the basics behind these issues.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
talking points.
Thank you guys for being
Yeah.
here.
Thanks so much. And yeah, happy International Women's Day tomorrow.
Yay.
And we'll be back for a stream 2 Sundays from now, probably. That's been our little
Yes, on
schedule
your channel. And then
on
I
Friday.
want to have you on my channel on Friday,
Okay.
hopefully. So let's like tentatively plan on that if you're free. Are you
Yep.
dog sitting?
I am dog sitting, but the doggy is going home about 5:30 p.m. Friday,
Oh,
so
okay.
that's just in time for streaming.
So yeah, so I think we'll be talking about the divine feminine. I think we're going to read an article. Maybe we'll read it together on the stream and talk about it. That would be pretty fun. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you guys so much. And we'll see you super soon on one of our channels.
Yep. And in the description box, there's all the sources that we used today, as well as you can click on Lisa Michelle's name and go subscribe to her channel. Okay. Have a great evening, y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.